Hello and welcome to While Right. My name is Dr. Thomas and today's presentation will be over autoethnography. Our objectives are to understand the power of storytelling, to understand what autoethnography is, to understand what qualitative research is, to understand how to write an autoethnography. All right, so the power of storytelling, the healing power of storytelling. So I like to tell the story about, I would say, a small part of my childhood that's very memorable to me. Growing up, my mother was very eclectic. So, and I would call her a hippie, right? Very free spirited. As a young child, I never once thought or judged why we moved around so much. There were times where I would miss my friends, when I would get to know friends, but it wasn't something that left a negative impression on me. So for me, moving around a lot was a little bit of an adventure. So growing up, my mother, she would move us around a lot. And we lived in Memphis, Tennessee, we lived in Colorado and other various places. And we would take road trips and just she would decide this is where we're going to move or where we're going to go, right? This year or this semester. Just whenever she felt the bug to move around, she would. But what I remember most is when we moved to Denver, Colorado. And I believed we were in Aurora. And during this time, I think I was about 5. So when we look at the healing power of storytelling, and you look at it from a narrative standpoint, you telling your story, you have to think about narrowing down your life story. What part of your life do you want to focus on, and what part of your life would you like to share? So for the purpose of this story, it would be my 5 to 6-year-old self. And when we moved to Aurora, Colorado for the first time, because I think we moved to Colorado twice. We moved back home to Arkansas and then back to Colorado. During this time, I have some very vivid memories. The first memory that I have is us living in a homeless shelter. I believe it was, time was not really relevant or is not really relevant to children. It doesn't really exist. But if I could give a number to how long we were in that homeless shelter, it maybe was like a week or so, right? And it could have been longer. But in my mind, it didn't seem that long. But what I vividly remember, was being in a big room, almost like if it was a gym, and it was a lot of beds in this room. And I remember us, having to go to sleep at a certain time, waking up and eating. I remember being warm and safe, and I remember being surrounded by some very unique people. So it never was a negative feeling for me. I was always curious and interested. The next thing I remember was that we did finally find I think an apartment or a house. And during this time, my mother had got into Buddhism. And as she got into Buddhism, she introduced it to us. As a 5 or 6-year-old girl, I vividly remember sitting cross-legged, the smell of incense, and also I remember the sound of bells. And then the next thing I remember was someone telling us to repeat Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. I had no idea we were practicing Buddhism at the time. But to my surprise, when I grew up, I told my mom about this time in Denver, Colorado, and she could not believe that I remembered that. To this day, when I smell an incense, it takes me back to my 5 or 6-year-old self sitting down in cross-legged position and saying those words. I also remember feeling the peace from practicing Buddhism. That's interesting, right? As a 5 or 6-year-old, you would think I was already at peace, which I was, but I felt a deeper sense of peace. which led me into practice and led me into doing more spiritual practices as opposed to being more religious or having, I would say, saying that I come from some sort of religious sector. Now, religion has been a foundation because my mother also practiced Christian Science, we were Baptist, and so on and so forth. I mentioned earlier that she was very eclectic and very much a free spirit. But the healing power from this story can help others by showing and highlighting how there can be positives that come from seemingly negative experiences. Us living in a homeless shelter. And I also forgot to tell you, I do remember us sleeping in our car in the mountains when we first got there. We actually did that first before we got to the homeless shelter. And then we finally got an apartment and then a house. I do remember us living in a home in Colorado as well. But these experiences didn't leave a negative impact on me. They left a very positive impact on me, and especially the parts about the spiritual practices. I do believe that leaning into those practices, they help my mother and to help her get grounded. And she also passed it down to us, which helped us and continues to help us in our adult life as well. So as you prepare to write your autoethnography, I want you to think about a time in your life, be it negative or positive, and how it could potentially help not only heal you, but also those that are reading or listening to your story as well. I like to tell students that your story matters. No matter how awful you think it is, it matters. It can help you heal, and it can also help others heal as well. So what is an autoethnography? An autoethnography is a personal narrative. It starts with the researcher's own experience, using personal stories, memories, and reflections as your data. An autoethnography helps you see from a cultural lens. It goes beyond simply recounting personal events. The researcher, which is you get to analyze your experience to understand how they relate to a broader cultural, social, or political context. The ethnographic method, while rooted in personal experience, autoethnography utilizes methods like those used in traditional ethnography, such as observation, cultural analysis, and interpretation. It also uses reflexivity. This is a key aspect of autoethnography, where the researcher critically examines their own role, bias, and influence on the research process. It helps you to embrace your emotions, your perspective, and experience as valuable data. It allows for a more honest and transparent approach to your research as well. It helps the researcher recognize that your story, as I said in the beginning, it's always part of the context, and it is very important to the process of it as well. Evocation and analytical. Autoethnography writing often blends narrative storytelling with scholarly analysis, aiming to evoke emotional responses while also offering insightful interpretation. The research behind autoethnography. So there are two types of research. The qualitative, which the focus explores quality, characteristics, and descriptions. Examples of this is customer feedback, interview transcripts, open-ended survey responses, and observation. Some of the characteristics of qualitative research is subjective, often involves interpretation. It can be descriptive or categorical. The goal in qualitative research is to understand experiences, perspectives, and meaning. The data type, word, images, videos, and other non-numerical information. The analysis, it focuses on themes, patterns, and interpretation. So why is qualitative research important? Qualitative research is important because why is it important to the autoethnography? It's important because, as you can see here, you can interview people in your family. So for me, if my mother was still alive, I could interview her and ask her. Well, I did interview her informally and asked her what drove her to want to move to Colorado. She said she didn't know. She just heard that it was a good place to live and she decided that's where she wanted to go. So you can interview those in your family that's living, and you can also interview others and not only ask them about their experience, but you can ask them about how they perceive you doing, or how they perceived you then, if this is a past experience that you've had, or now during this particular experience that you're having. Now, the difference between the qualitative and the quantitative's focus is to measure quantities, amounts, and numerical values. For instance, I could go back to that time when I was 5 years old and look at around the year that I was 5. And if I wanted to know how many people were practicing Buddhism at that time, I could bring in that statistical data. Were there more people practicing Buddhism? Is that a reason why my mother got into that? And how does practicing Buddhism as a young child affect someone later on in life? So I could go look for research on this and look at the data on this as well. The examples in quantitative, we look at the age, height, number of purchases, test scores, survey responses with numerical scales. So this is the difference. With the qualitative, you're looking at feedback and interviews and survey responses. With quantitative, we're looking at those sometimes categorical variables, which is the height, the age, and so on and so forth. The characteristics in the quantitative, it's objective, it's measurable, and it can be statistically analyzed. So the characteristics within the qualitative, it's subjective. So it often involves more of interpretation as opposed to those measurable points. The goal is to quantify relationships, test hypotheses, and make other predictions. The data type is numbers and, of course, numerical measurements. The analysis, it involves statistical techniques like averages, correlations, and regressions. So, for example, what was the average number of people practicing Buddhism during that time, right? And is there a correlation with those practicing Buddhism then and maybe being more spiritual now? Qualitative, quantitative. All right, so let's look at how to write an autoethnography. So you want to start with that narrative piece. What do you want to focus on from your life? What do you don't mind sharing with other people? When you start with that narrative piece, you don't necessarily need to include any data because this is coming directly from you. When you begin to write your autoethnography and you begin to quote others or summarize or paraphrase what someone else says, then you have to include in-text citation. You will also have to include a works cited page, so a list of those interviews or even data that you collect. Also, details. You want to include both the external and internal details. I mentioned earlier, I remembered the smell of the incense when they burn. I also remembered the sound of the bell. However, I could have included some metaphors and some similes to give the readers a little bit more visual of those external details. Your paper should also be coherent. I like to tell students it's important when you're writing an autoethnography or some sort of research supported paper to start with your own words. Don't start with a quote or summary in your paragraph. You want to transition your readers from one thought to the next, something that is something that's going to lead until that next point that you're going to make. And you want to be the guide when you're writing a research supported paper. And number 5, which I just mentioned, it's a research supported essay. Therefore, your sources should merely support your story. Your sources should not be your entire story. You are a part of that, right? Within an autoethnography paper. All right, so if you have any questions at this time or any comments or thoughts, please leave them in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, continue to look at my other videos on YouTube at www.youtube.com/ywrite18. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video and other videos that I have. And again, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section.